sigh. Sometimes we dream together of how it will be when we all get to heaven. God's family. When a brother meets sorrow, we all feel his grief. When he passed through the valley, we all feel relief. Together in sunshine, together in his precious name. And sometimes we laugh together, sometimes we cry, sometimes we share together heartaches and sighs. Sometimes we dream together of how it will be when we all get to heaven. God's family. And though some go before us, we all meet again, just inside the city. As we enter in, there'll be no more parting. With Jesus we'll be together forever. God's family. And sometimes we laugh together, sometimes we cry, sometimes we share together heartaches and sighs. Sometimes we dream together of how it will be when we all get to heaven. God's family. Turn with me now to number 95. Number 95. After this song, we'll ask Brother Bob, if he would, to lead us in a word of prayer. 95. Earth holds no treasure, but her is refuge. However precious they be, yet there's a country to which I am going. Heaven holds all to me. Heaven holds all to me. Brighter its glory will be. Joy without measure will be my treasure. Heaven holds all to me. Out on the hills of that wonderful country, happy, contented, and free, loved ones are waiting and watching my coming. Heaven holds all to me. Heaven holds to me. Brighter its glory will be. Joy without measure will be my treasure. Heaven holds all to me. Why should I long for the world with its sorrow, when in that home o'er the sea, aliens are singing the wonderful story? Heaven holds all to me. Heaven holds all to me. Brighter its glory will be. Joy without measure will be my treasure. Heaven holds all to me. Let's pray.
Dear Heavenly Father, we're thankful to be here tonight. Hear another portion from thy word. I pray that each one of us will be great blessed. We pray for all who are unable to be here, those who may be sick, travelers. We pray that they would be able to get back soon to join us. We pray that you would of each one of us, when you have all this bad weather, sometimes it's hard for people to get out of the seriously bad weather, wet, cold weather, for one reason or other. We're trying to they'll find a way as soon as they can. We pray that you will be thankful for this land that we have and for all the freedom we enjoy. And we thank you for the defenders of our faith, especially those who are in harm's way and have maybe paid the supreme sacrifice. Pray that you go with us now to furtherance of our service. Pray that you forgive us all of our many sins. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good. Now, turn with me to 342. 342. Troubles and times are here, filling his heart with fear. Freedom we all hold dear. Now they say, of your heart to God, saved from the chastening blood. Seek away the pilgrim's fraud, we shall pay. Jesus coming soon. Many will be the prophet will sound. All the days in the sky, going where no one God heavenward bound. Love so many cold, lose their home of gold. This is God's word is told, we love bound. When these signs come to pass near the end that light, it will come very fast, trumpet will sound. Jesus is coming soon. Many will be there, trumpet will sound. All the days shall pass, watch the end of sky. Going where no one God ever found. Trouble will soon be over, and forever. When we meet on that shore, we all care. Rise up in the sky, telling this world goodbye. On the way then we'll fly, Lord, to share. Jesus is coming soon. Many will be there, trumpet will sound. All the dead shall find God's in the sky. Going no one ever bound. Put your marker at number 690. That'll be the song, the invitation song after the service.
Well, good evening, everyone. We so much appreciate y'all being here. And we've got visitors with us tonight from Colorado. So they get the prize for the farthest travel, I think. And the Smiths, is that right? Okay, see, they were bragging on me because I remembered them. They visited before, but names I don't remember. I remember faces and names don't stick with me, so I want to make sure I got the right name. They're here visiting family for over the holidays from Colorado, so we appreciate them being here tonight. So make sure everybody welcomes them. We appreciate y'all being here. We appreciate everybody being here. So if you would, turn your Bibles over to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. That's the first verses we'll be looking at here in just a few moments. So as Chester said, we're going to be talking about God's family tonight. And you all know that being part of a family is a tremendous blessing. We just, as we said, just went through the holiday season where a lot of people gather together with family and celebrate loved ones. And so it is a blessing to be part of a family. And family can take different forms, especially when you're talking about whether or not there are children involved. So there are some couples who have no children, either by choice or maybe there's a medical issue there. But some have no children, well, they're still a family. You have other couples who maybe have one child. That would encompass Janice and myself. We have one child. And then there's a lot of couples that they may have multiple children in their family. And those of you that have multiple children, you'll vouch for this, that the siblings, the brothers and sisters, the various children, they typically are not clones of each other. Even if they're twins, a lot of times, they're not clones, even though they have the same parents, but they usually have different personalities, sometimes on opposite ends of the spectrum. They may have very different interests from each other, different talents and abilities from each other. Some of them may do exceptionally well in school, while maybe some of their other siblings struggle a little bit. As we said, some may have artistic ability or some kind of talent that maybe the others don't have. Some may be more attractive and others may be less attractive. But we all know that good parents love all their children. And sometimes with personality, some may be a little bit more difficult than others, but you love all of your children, very much so, because they're all yours, even though they're all very different. And as we said, their personalities and talents and that sort of thing. Well, it's also a tremendous blessing, an even better blessing, to be a member of God's family. God's family is comprised of his children. All of us have the potential to be God's children, and it's comprised of the children who are willing to obey the gospel and those who are doing their very best to try to live faithfully each day and do the things that God would have them do. Those are God's children. Those are members of his family. Now, God's children all have the same Father, the same Heavenly Father, but like earthly physical siblings, God's children are not clones of each other. Each child of God is different. Each child of God is unique. Each child of God is essential. And that's the big point we really want to make tonight. All of God's children are important. They are all essential. Now, like with physical siblings, some may be better educated than others. Some may be financially wealthy, while others maybe not so much. Some may have a multitude of talents, while others seem like maybe they don't have as many talents as some people do. But the important thing to remember is that all of those distinctions don't really matter. Those are not important things, especially in the eyes of God. They seem to be to human beings. But if we're going to be children of God, we need to be Christ-like. We need to try to think the way God does. And those distinctions to God, they don't matter. Okay, to be a child of God is to be special. To be a child of God is to have a unique place in God's family. All members of God's family are important. All members of God's family are essential. Again, we tend to rank people, this person's more important than that person, and that God doesn't see us that way. We are all important to him. We are all special to him. We are all essential to the functioning of God's family. So if you will, turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Let's begin in verse 27. Talking to the church members there at Corinth. That's what Paul said. Now ye are the body of Christ, and members in particular. And God hath set some in the church, first apostles, secondarily prophets, thirdly teachers, After that, miracles, then gifts of healing, helps, governments, diversities of tongues. Now notice the questions he asked here. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Are all workers of miracles? Have all the gifts of healing? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? But covet earnestly the best gifts, and yet show I unto you a more excellent way. So what he's telling us here is that each member of God's family, each member of the church has his or her place, has his or her function within the church. Just because everybody's not an apostle doesn't mean that the other members are not important. He's saying everybody doesn't do these things, but collectively together, we perform all the things that God needs. Therefore, we're all essential. We're all important. Each needs to do what he or she can in the service of God. That's what's important. So tonight, what we want to do is we want to examine 4 different categories of people that either use or fail to use their circumstances to better serve the Lord. Okay, so either they use it or they don't use it to serve the Lord. So we want to consider the opportunities that people have versus the actions that they actually take based on their opportunities. So as I said, we're going to divide this into 4 groups here. So the first 2 of the 4, these are people that seemingly have little. But what do they do with the little that they have? It's the first 2 we want to look at. So the first one, these are people who do little with the little that they have. So they seemingly don't have much, but they don't do anything with what they have. Maybe they only have a few talents. Maybe if you're talking financially, maybe they don't have a lot of money. Maybe they don't have a lot of ability in different things. And so they will use that as an excuse to probably convince themselves and convince others that, well, I'm just not important in the church. I'm not important in the kingdom. There's nothing really that I can do because I don't have a lot of talent or ability, or I don't have a lot of money, or whatever it is. They convince themselves they're not important and there's nothing that they can contribute. Now, it's true. This is a biblical principle that for those that have received less, God does expect less of them. But there's a difference between God expecting less and God expecting nothing. Because everybody has a function, everybody has things that they can do. It might be less than some other people, but everybody's got things that they can do. And God expects us to do what we can with what we have, whatever that is. Right? Now, we want to look at the lesson, learn from the 1 talent man. So if you'll turn over to Matthew chapter 25, we see here the familiar account. We got the master. He calls in 3 of his servants, and he's going to give them all some money called talents. It's a denomination of money. And so one of his servants, he gives 5 talents. The other servant, he gives 2 talents. And then the last guy, he gives him 1 talent. And he expects them to do something with it. And he's going to be gone for a while. And he's coming back. And I want to see that you guys have used this. Right? And so the first 2 servants, the guy with 5 talents, he invested his and he doubled it to 10 talents. The second servant had 2 talents. He invested also somehow, and he doubled his to 4 talents. Well, the third servant, who only had 1 talent, he did absolutely nothing with it. So let's look at that. Matthew 25, beginning in verse 24. This is when the master comes back. Matthew 25 and verse 24. Then he which had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew thee that thou art a hard man, reaping where thou hast not sown, and gathering where thou hast not straw. And I was afraid, and went and hid thy talent in the earth. Lo, there thou hast, that is thine. So he gives him back the one. Here's the talent you get. I didn't steal it. I didn't lose it. There it is. I'm gonna give it back to you. But it's just the same one talent that the master gave when he left. Verse 26, his Lord answered and said unto him, thou wicked and slothful servant. In other words, you've been useless while I was gone. Thou knewest that I reap where I sow not, and gather where I have not strawed. Thou oughtest therefore to have put my money to the exchangers, and then at my coming I should have received mine own with usury. In other words, you could have at least put it in the bank, got a little bit of interest on something, so I could have made some kind of gain, even though it was only one talent. You could have done something with it, but you didn't. Verse 28, take therefore the talent from him, and give it unto him which hath 10 talents. For unto every one that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken, and even that which he hath. And cast ye the unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So that third servant, he was given less money, or he had less talent than the other guys had. But what talent he had, he wasted it. He didn't do anything with it. And so the master, who of course is God in this case, and the servants are Christians, the followers of God, the master cast him out. Like, I gave you something and you did nothing with it. Yeah, you had less than the other two guys had, but you still should have done something with what I gave you. That's the principle that we see here. Okay, we cannot make excuses to God about why we did not use whatever it was that God gave us, no matter how little it is. We cannot do that. Now, one other thing before we pass on to the second group to mention too, what some people are guilty of is maybe they have more than one talent. In this case, we're not always talking about money, it's ability or whatever. Maybe they have more than one, but they're only using one. So again, it's the same idea that somebody is not maximizing whatever it is they have. They maybe only be using part of what they have, or maybe nothing of what they have in the service of God. And God has shown us here that that is sinful conduct. And that's why the master said, you're going to be cast out into darkness. I didn't say you had to do as much as the man with 5 talents, but you should have done something with what you had, and you didn't do anything with it. So there are people like that who do very little with them. Well, the second category is people who do much, even though they only have a little. But they take what they have and they run with it, and they do something to serve the Lord. They don't use it as an excuse. Well, I don't have very much, so I really can't do it. They go, what I do have, I'm going to take it and I'm going to serve God with it. I'm going to find some way to do this. These are people that are more pleasing to the Lord. Even though God has given them less to work with, they're going to do something with what they have. Okay, so let's notice a couple of examples. So if you would, be turning over to the book of Judges, chapter 13. We're going to talk a little bit about Shamgar. You all know Shamgar, right? No? Everybody knows who Shamgar is. Come on. Yeah, Shamgar is a very obscure. You might have, this may be the first time you've ever heard the name, possibly, or you don't remember it, maybe you've read it, because Shamgar is an individual who's literally only mentioned in 2 verses of the scriptures. He is mentioned in Judges 3:31, which we're going to read here in a second, and Judges chapter 5 and verse 6. Only 2 times we read about Shamgar. Well, Shamgar was one of the judges. This was the period that judges ruled over Israel, and he was one of those judges. So he's a person that seemingly, according to the historical record, pretty insignificant. Maybe he didn't have a lot, and we're going to see here, he doesn't have a lot to work with, but notice the great thing he's going to do with what little he has. So looking at Judges 3 and verse 31, and it's going through the list of judges. So it says, and after the previous judge, after him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, which slew of the Philistines 600 men with an ox goad. And he also delivered Israel. Now, you do know who the Philistines are. You've heard a lot about the Philistines. These were a warlike people, okay, and they were fierce enemies of the Israelites, and they would attack them often, and they would steal their crops, they would destroy their villages, and they would capture some of the Israelites and take them back home and force them into slavery. So whenever the Philistines would attack, a lot of the Israelites would run in fear, rightfully so, because these were fierce, formidable enemies that did a lot of harm to the Israelites. But notice that Shamgar didn't do that. I'm sure he probably was afraid, but he didn't give in to his fear. He stood his ground when the Philistines attacked. And he fought at least 600, but I don't know if it was more than that, but we know that he killed 600 people, apparently by himself. He stood up against those 600 to 1. That's really bad odds. But he killed 600 of these fierce warriors, and all he had was an ox goad. And for people today, a lot of us would go, well, what in the world's an ox goad? An ox goad was a pointed stick, it was a sharp stick that you would use to goad or prod animals to move. That's an ox goad. Well, that's all he had. So yes, it could be used as a weapon, but you've got one guy with one sword or spear against 600 warriors, and with that one weapon, he killed them all. And it says here in Judges 3:31, he saved Israel by doing that. So he didn't give in to his fear. He didn't wait for a better situation. Well, maybe I'm going to run today. I'll fight them some other day when the odds are a little better. He knew that they were going to be overrun and somebody had to stand up and do something, even though all he had was that one ox goad. But he did what God needed him to do. And so the lesson here for us is no matter how little we think we have, we need to use it for the Lord, and great things can be accomplished, even though maybe we just have a little, if we'll simply use what we have. Well, let's go from Shamgar, a very obscure person that nobody's ever heard of. Let's look at somebody that probably everybody has heard of. So if we turn over to Luke chapter 21, we want to notice the account of the poor widow. And we've all heard this story, the poor widow. Luke 21, we're going to look at the first 4 verses. Because this is another person who had little, but she did a lot with it. And he looked up, that's talking about Jesus, and saw the rich men casting their gifts into the treasury. And he saw also a certain poor widow casting in thither 2 mites, which is less than a penny, really small amount of money. And he said, of a truth I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast in more than all those rich men, and all that money they threw in there. Her 2 mites are far more valuable than everything they threw, what Jesus is saying. For all these have of their abundance cast into the offerings of God, but she of her penury hath cast in all the living that she had. So she didn't have much, but she gave what she had. She gave far less than what all the rich men gave. Now, we don't want to get the wrong meaning out of this either. People say, well, wait a minute. So is Jesus telling me that I got to give every penny I own to the church? I got to bankrupt myself? Because, she gave everything she had. Is Jesus saying we all have to do that? No. That's not the point that Jesus is trying to make. She probably figured that amount of money wasn't going to get her far anyway, so she might as well give it to God, right? But she sacrificed. She gave what she really couldn't afford very much, whereas Jesus is saying all these rich guys over here, they gave their leftovers. They gave maybe a lot of money, but it was something they weren't going to really miss because they have so much more. So they threw in what they really didn't care much about, where this woman made a genuine sacrifice. Okay, so the idea for us is whether we're talking about money or using our talents or using our time, whatever it is, whatever resources we have, we need to give to the Lord. And maybe we need to sacrifice a little bit. Now, we don't have to go bankrupt, but we need to sacrifice a little bit. Okay, so we gave you this example once before. We've got, y'all know I'm a big baseball fan, so you got all these guys now that are signing these $300 million contracts. So these guys are making $30 million a year because they can hit a ball with a stick. Well, more power to them, right? Yeah. So they're making all this money. So if one of them decided that he was going to become a member of this congregation, attend services here, well, good. We'd welcome him with open arms. That'd be great. Okay, and if he put every week $1,000 into that collection, now for you and me, we'd be going, boy, that's a lot of money. Because I couldn't afford to put $1,000 every week in the collection plate. Most of you probably couldn't either. Eventually, I'm going to run out of money if I'm putting that much in. Okay, but for that guy, what's $1,000 a week? Nothing. That's $52,000 a year. Well, the man makes $30 million a year. That'd be like you or me putting a nickel or a dime in a collection. Right? It's something I wouldn't, I've got a little change in my pocket here. I'll throw that in there. That's really not going to make me sacrifice. I'm not going to miss that at all. So I'm just giving God a little pittance. That's what he's saying here. Saying, give a little bit. And again, it's not just money. In this case, he's talking about money, but it's talent, it's ability, it's time. Give unto the Lord till maybe it hurts a little bit. You don't have to bankrupt yourself, but give of your money where I'm giving enough that I'm probably going to miss that a little bit. I'm not going to put myself in a bind or I'm going to lose my house, but I want to give to the work of the church. So you do that with money. You do that with your talents. If you have talents and the church needs things to be done and you do those things, make time to do it. You give of your time. Maybe time is one of the most valuable things we have, even more so than money. Right? And don't say, well, I'll help the church out, but I'm too busy. Give of your time, even if you have to sacrifice something for yourself, give of your time to help the work of the church. These are the things that we're talking about here. So even if you feel like, well, I don't have a lot to contribute, maybe you've got more to contribute than you're giving yourself credit for. And that's what some of these people did. They did a lot with very little. Well, let's go to the other category. What about those people that have a lot? Same thing here. You got two groups that fall into that category. People that have received more blessings, maybe than other people. So first of all, what about those that do little, even though they have a lot, but they don't really do much of anything with it? Some people have been blessed in so many ways. It might be money, or again, it might be that they have a lot of talents, they have a lot of ability, they have a lot of resources, they have an abundance of things, and yet they really don't do anything for the Lord with all those blessings that God has bestowed upon them. They keep it for themselves. This is definitely a sin against God. Now, in Luke chapter 12, and we went over this morning in the Bible study class, and that's just a coincidence. I really wasn't even thinking about the Bible study where we would be at in Matthew when I wrote this sermon. But it just so happened we read these verses this morning. So that really is a coincidence. But the story of the rich farmer, right? And so we're not going to go back and read it again, but basically this guy, he's doing great. And his barns are just overflowing with stuff. And what am I going to do? And he said, you know what? I'm just going to tear down these barns and I'm going to build bigger ones. And then I'm just going to sit back and relax and not do anything else because I've arrived and I've made it. Okay. And then God tells him in verse 20, he says, thou fool, calls him a fool, said, you're going to die tonight. Your soul is going to be required of you tonight. So you build all these big barns and you think you're going to sit on your laurels and, well, you're going to be called home tonight. What's going to happen to all that stuff? What's going to happen to those new barns? It's going to go to somebody else. You worked for it, but somebody else is going to get to enjoy it because you have put all your efforts into worldly things. This guy didn't put anything into God. So verse 21, so is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Is he what? He's a fool. So God called this man a fool, and he's saying anybody else that does the same thing, in God's eyes, you are a fool. Okay, because you're putting everything here. So there's no record of this man ever using his wealth to help anybody but himself. So God blessed him tremendously, and he just hogged it all for himself. Now, I don't want you to misinterpret. I'm not saying, and God is not saying, you mean even if I work hard and I make all this money, I can't spend anything on myself? No, that's not what he's saying. Of course you can. You can certainly spend some money and do some things that are fun and enjoyable and things that help your own family. Of course you can. It's your money, you earned it, right? But it's also God's money. And God gave you, whatever money that I earned from work is because God gave you the ability to do that job. And I need to thank him for that. So yes, you can spend things on yourself, but also use what you've been blessed with to help those that are less fortunate. Especially somebody like this guy who was blessed tremendously, but again, he just kind of hogged it all for himself. Well, what about the account of the rich man and Lazarus? All right, we've all read that in Luke chapter 16. Remember Lazarus, the poor, he's at the gate, and the rich man doesn't do anything for Lazarus. He keeps everything for himself. And as far as we can tell, he didn't do anything, he didn't show any concern for any people, not just Lazarus, but anyone. And then what happened to the rich man? Well, he paid for that with eternal torment. Because he said, in your life, God blessed you tremendously. What did you do with it? You just kept it all for yourself. So now Lazarus is being rewarded and you're going to be punished. Because Lazarus, in life, he didn't have anything. You had everything and you just kept it to yourself. What about the rich young ruler in Luke 18? We remember that account. So this was a young man who had tons of wealth, and he did not want to give it up to serve the Lord. And so he's going to be lost unless he repented at some point after that. But in the gospel account, he's going to be lost because he doesn't want to give up all the blessings that he has received, again, forgetting that you got those blessings from the Lord in the first place. You need to give some of that back, not all of it. Like I said, we give you some of it for ourselves, but you need to give some back, and especially to help those people that maybe haven't been blessed as much as you or I have. So that's an important lesson for us to learn. Now, let's turn over to Luke 12 and 48. We do want to read this one. Luke 12 and 48. We said a minute ago that it's true that those that receive fewer blessings, there's less of those people. But as we said, he doesn't require nothing, he just requires less. Well, what about those people that have been very blessed? Well, the opposite is true. From them, God requires a lot because they've received a lot. So look at Luke 12 and 48. But he that knew not and did commit things worthy of stripes shall be beaten with few stripes. For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be much required. And to whom men have committed much, of him they will ask the more. So if we have received more blessings than other people, we have an obligation to do something with those blessings and help the people that maybe have not received as many blessings. And some people might say, well, yeah, I can't understand. Why would a loving God not bless everybody the same amount? Maybe it's for that reason right there. All right? Maybe it's, okay, there are people in need, and God's looking at me going, Mark, you're better off than those people. Are you going to do something to help them with all the stuff I've given you, or are you going to keep it for yourself? Maybe that's why God does that. I don't know. He didn't tell me. Right? But we do know that some people are blessed more and some people are blessed less. And I also know that I trust in God, and he's got a reason for doing that. Right? But I know that he tells us the more we are given, the more we're going to be held accountable, the more we're going to be expected to do. So you got too many people that do a little, even though they've been given a lot. And then finally, we have a real good category, people that have been blessed with a lot, but they do a lot with it. They recognize that, God gave me all these things, and I'm going to do everything I can to use it, not just for myself, but I'm going to help other people with it as well. They did not waste what God had given them on themselves, like the rich man did. He didn't want to help Lazarus, he just did it all for himself. Well, let's look really quickly at 3 examples of this. Turn over to Genesis chapter 13. and verse 2. We're going to look at three people just very quickly. One is Abraham. We all know who Abraham is. Look at Genesis 13 and verse 2. Did you realize Abraham's loaded? He's doing really well. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. That's a pretty good combination right there. And it doesn't say he was rich, so he was very rich. So he was a wealthy man. But Abraham knew that all those things were blessings from God. And so Abraham did not selfishly keep all that, but Abraham used his money, his talents, he used everything to glorify God. He was grateful to God, thankful to God that he had been so blessed and his family had been so blessed. And he wanted to do what he could to glorify God. Abraham's a really good example for us. We'll turn over to Hebrews chapter 11. What about Moses? Another example of somebody who was given much ability, but he did something good with it. And notice what he turned down. So Hebrews chapter 11, beginning in verse 24. By faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. For he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. So Moses, as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, we know he wasn't really, but she claimed him, he could have lived in the lap of luxury. He could have had more money than he knew what to do with. He could have had people fanning him and feeding him grapes for the rest of his life. But he turned his back on all that. And God was able to use Moses because Moses had leadership qualities. Moses was able to convince Pharaoh to let the people go, even though Moses had a speech impediment. And he tried to, argue with God a little bit. You want me to talk to him? I can't even string two sentences together. God said, yeah, you're my man. Go do it. Moses went and did it. And then, again, giving up the lap of luxury, what does he trade that in for? 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. But the Israelites needed a leader, and God needed Moses to do that, and Moses answered the call. So God gave Moses great leadership ability, and Moses used that for God's purpose rather than selfishly, I'm just going to stay here and boss people around in Egypt and get all that money. He walked away from all that. Now, how many people would do that? But Moses did. He was given much, and with it, he did much. Finally, look at Acts 22, verse 3. What about Saul of Tarsus? Notice the advantages that Saul of Tarsus has. And this is him talking to us. Of course, he becomes the Apostle Paul. In Acts 22:3, this is him writing here. He says, I am verily a man which am a Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, and taught according to the perfect manner of the law of the fathers, and was zealous toward God as ye all are this day. So he's telling us here, he was a highly educated Jew. He wasn't just anybody. He learned at the feet of Gamaliel, which was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Hebrew scholar. That's who taught him. If you could pick anybody to teach you, that'd be the guy. And that's who Saul learned after. So he was a person of high rank and high position, a Hebrew scholar, and sort of like Moses, he turned his back on all that, and he chose to suffer the persecution, to use his education to suffer the persecution to advance the cause of Christ. So God had provided him with a good education. God had given him much. And Saul, who becomes Paul, he used that not for himself, but for God's purpose. So where do you see yourself tonight in God's family? Are you giving your best effort for the Lord? Am I giving my best effort for the Lord? Are we using our God-given talents for God? Are we using our God-given resources to the fullest extent we can for the kingdom? Are we doing that? The family of God needs everyone to do their part. He said everyone has a role to play. Whether we think it's big or small, it's all big to God. It's all essential to God. It's all important. So don't convince yourself that you have no value or there's not much you can offer. Well, what can I do? You do a lot more than you think you can. Even if you feel like you haven't been blessed with as much ability as somebody else has, you still have ability and you need to use that for God's purposes. You can make a valuable contribution. We all can, and God expects us to make a contribution. Dedicate yourself to do what you can with what you have to advance the kingdom of God. And then if we do that, we know we will be pleasing to God. Just use what He's given us. Well, tonight, if you're not a Christian, you need to become one. We talked about being a member of God's family, to be a child of God, and there's only one way to do that. You've got to be baptized into Christ. There is no other way to get into the church. We talked about this morning, there's only one true church, and we need to be in it. Okay? And in order to get there, you've got to be baptized into Christ. If you come up out of that water, you will be a new creature. Your sins will be washed away, and God will add you to the church. If you have a need to do that tonight, we encourage you to come up, and we will help you with that. If you are a Christian, you have been a child of God, you've been part of God's family, but you've left the family. You've fallen away. You've not been faithful. You've not been obedient to God. You've gone back into the world in some shape, form, or fashion. It's not too late as of right now. It's not too late. Tomorrow, it might be too late. Later this night, it might be too late. But right now, you have an opportunity to come home, to make it right, to confess those sins, repent for those sins, ask for God's forgiveness, and He'll restore you to His family. You will once again be a child of God. So if you have a need tonight, please come forward as together we stand and we sing.
Careless soul, what will you linger, wandering from God? Do not
The invitation, oh, prepare to meet thy God, careless soul. Oh, heed the warning, for your life will soon be gone. To face the judgment, to meet thy God. I so thought the sorrow you standing, while the fleeting years go by, and your life is spent in folly. Oh, prepare to meet thy God, careless soul. Oh, heed me, for your life will soon be gone. Oh, to face the judgment, to meet thy God. Hear you not the earnest pleadings of your friends who wish thou well, and perhaps before tomorrow it will be called to meet thy God, careless soul. Oh, heed the warning, for your life will soon be gone. Oh, have to face the judgment, to meet thy God.
If you spurn the
the invitation, till the Spirit shall depart. Then you'll see your sad condition, unprepared to meet thy God. Careless soul, oh heed the warning, for your life will soon be gone. Oh, how sad to face the judgment, unprepared to meet thy God.
Do we have anyone tonight that has not partaken of the Lord's Supper that would like to do so? Please raise your hand. There's no one here tonight.